Hi, everyone. I'm Ali Litsi, Marketing Manager at Semperis. I would like to thank you for joining us today for our webinar, 5-Step Survival Guide for Protecting Active Directory from a Ransomware Attack. Our presenters today are Tomasz Onyszko. He is the CTO and Managing Partner at Radhika. He's had over 15 years experience in IAM for SMEs and large-scale enterprises worldwide. He's a cloud enthusiast and expert. He is a winner of the Microsoft MVP Award, and he's a conference speaker and blogger. We also have with us today Darren Mar-Elia. He is a head of product at Semperis, 14-time winner of the Microsoft MVP Award in group policy, cloud, and data center management. With over 30 years in IT and software, he is the founder of GPO Guy, SDM Software. He's a speaker, author, and blogger about all things Microsoft infrastructure. In his free time, he's a winemaker, road cyclist, and AI enthusiast. Guy Teverovsky is our third presenter today. He is the co-founder and CTO of Semperis, and prior to Semperis, he was a senior premier field engineer for Microsoft. He has 2 decades in IT and software. He's an ex-Microsoft MVP in directory services, and he's a contributor to many Microsoft blogs. So as we mentioned previously, we have Tomasz with us here today. He is the CTO of Radhika, which is a Microsoft Gold Partner technology consulting and delivery company with 120 skilled consultants, MVPs, and former Microsoft Services employees. They work worldwide in 22 countries and 3 continents. We also have Daren and Guy from Semperis today. And Semperis is an enterprise identity protection platform, helps enterprises recover from cyber breaches and identity system failures on-prem and on cloud. Semperis' core capabilities include a fully automated Active Directory forest, disaster recovery, and real-time Active Directory change tracking, rollback, and auditing. All right, and then I'm going to pass the mic over to Daren.
So what we're going to cover today are some horror stories from the Active Directory security world. So Tomasz and Guy and I will share some stories that we've experienced personally or have worked with people who have experienced, so you can get a sense of how bad it can get. I think one of the things that we do want to underscore is that security is not that hard, that there's a lot of basics that you can apply fast and effectively, and we're going to share those in the webinar. And of course, because no webinar can be complete without a numbered key step that you can follow, we have 5 key steps that we're going to share to help prepare for recovery if that bad day comes. So I think one thing to point out is that NotPetya really changed the world in terms of what was possible from a malware attack perspective. So it was definitely a once-in-a-lifetime experience for a lot of IT people, in that it wiped out entire networks in a matter of hours and really hit a wide range of companies and organizations, from the smallest to the largest, government, private, all across the board, even globally. These headlines here just kind of share the toll that it took companies like Merck and Maersk and a variety of countries and governments and organizations across the world. So let's go ahead and start with some of those security horror stories. I'm going to go ahead and start with an enterprise that I had the fortune of hearing about, working with some folks on, which was a large European enterprise that had a malware attack that targeted their Active Directory domain controllers and had their entire AD encrypted. They were down for something like 2 weeks before they could really get back up to some level of service. It really was from an AD perspective, kind of a catastrophic loss, and tens of millions of dollars in losses. That's probably conservative, but that's the sort of advertised figure. And I think the idea here is that the malware was whether it was specifically targeting AD or not, it really impacted completely and utterly their Active Directory, where they had no Active Directory domain controllers left that were viable, and had to find offsite backups that were relatively old to bring back AD to some semblance of service. And to be able to do that, kind of globally, took a long time, took really like a couple weeks.
For what will happen if we'll be hit by the ransomware?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I mean, we come across this because we're in the AD forced recovery business. We come across this a lot, that some of the traditional methods that people used, like lag sites, if you remember back in the day, where that lag sites were sort of all the rage.
Yeah.
Or just backing up a few domain controllers, and having those backups available on site. That you have to make the assumption in today's world that all DCs are unavailable, and potentially all of your backup servers and backups are encrypted or unavailable as well. And how do you build resiliency into your recovery plan? And that is an interesting challenge that I think a lot of people, and including this customer, have underestimated.
Yeah. This brings one question, and I'm interested in your point of view, but also if somebody from audience can share their thoughts, because it's very rarely when I'm seeing in the recovery plan the path, which is what will happen if we can't recover. Yeah, because that's the question. Okay, we have a backups and we are doing everything to recover, but there might be a point in time where you have to say we are not able to recover, and what to do next.
Yeah, it's a really, I mean, I think when faced with the idea of having to rebuild your entire Active Directory from scratch, or at least enough of it to get your core business applications up and running, I mean, that's a pretty daunting and impactful event. And I think that's why we encourage people to have sort of multiple layers of a recovery plan. So you absolutely need offline backups that are not connected to the network. You absolutely need your backup or your recovery solution to be able to be rebuilt quickly and efficiently. So those are kind of prerequisites in this day and age.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just about SLA. Even if you realize that you can recover in 10 days, but after 5 days your company goes out of business because you're just losing too much money, then it's just game over. You need to plan ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, let's move on to another horror story.
Yeah, so that's actually is mine, and I was thinking about a couple of those. And when we spoke about those DCs right now, one other what came to my mind was a company with a different threat model, because that at the end, these horror stories are also related to the threat model. And in this other case, the threat model was people were stealing computers being DCs. And in this case, by design, they were encrypted because their most common problem with DCs was DCs being stolen. But getting back to this case, which is on a slide right now, so I was engaged with a financial institution, and we were doing some work there on upgrading their infrastructure, and that was 30,000 of users. And to my surprise, what I found out is that 300 of them, over 300 of them, were domain admins.
Wow.
Not counting all other administrative groups. It was like they had the 300 domain admins, and my first question was, wow, how you can know what they are doing there? Or how do you know who is this guy there? Because you have 30,000 people, so nobody knew everybody. But for some reason, you trust your entire environment to the 300 of people. And that was really like an aha moment for me, that basically they cannot trust their infrastructure. They don't know who is managing it. Yeah.
That is crazy. 300. Wow.
Yeah, that was 300 of domain admins. And I'm just interested, how often do you see something like this? Because when I was back in my days, I was managing AD. We had 300 domain controllers, and we have 15,000 of people, and there was only 5 people with the domain admin credentials, and it still worked. Yeah.
Right. I don't see this as much. I think people have gotten the message that domain admin is bad, at least to sort of widely distribute this access. I think what I see more of is sort of the more there's sort of more gray areas in terms of granting access to domain controllers. So there might be other groups that besides the domain admin that have been granted access to domain controllers, and this is ultimately just as bad. And I think that often gets overlooked more so than just putting people into domain admins, especially in organizations that have had AD for a while. They may have delegated additional rights to other groups, and untangling that mess tends to take a while, and people sort of miss it.
Yeah. And you're right with this, because the previous week I was doing Azure security training, and one of points there is that actually we have more infrastructure right now which needs to be protected, because besides the domain controllers itself, we have a AD Connect or ADFS, which is basically the critical infrastructure right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
And those are very often overlooked. Like, we protect DCs, but then we made everybody admin of the ADFS. Or
Exactly.
AD Connect. Yeah.
It's like PKI used to be the same back in there. Like, domain admins is restricted, but there are too many hands in their enterprise CA server. So
I think that the guy has prepared a few interesting cases, so we can move on to those.
So let's see. Those are, well, I can't go into much details as those are covered by NDA, but just the basic. It was about 10K user environment that was dedicated to highly critical application. And one day, the main controllers just started crashing, and because the main controllers were crashing, the application was basically not able to function properly, and it was a highly critical application, line of business application for that customer. And we spent several days and nights troubleshooting that and debugging this, and it ended up that, well, luckily for them, the domain controllers were secured and hardened, and that there was a malware on that network that was trying to exploit a recently discovered vulnerability, and it was just crashing the server. It was trying to exploit the vulnerability to infect the domain controller, but it failed to infect, but still the domain controller was crashing. So after several days, we were able to identify and pinpoint it to a workstation on that same network segment that has been infected with malware that was spreading. Sure.
My question here would be, do you think that what kind of skills do you need to detect something like this? If the guys in the audience, they are like everyday administrators, so what they should learn to be able to detect something like this, because that sounds like not very obvious. Yeah, it's something the antivirus is not catching it. You have all patched, and then you need to detect that what is killing your disease.
So there are tools out there that can assist you, like things like Microsoft ATA might be, well, specifically for that scenario, it was trying to exploit a vulnerability in SMB, and I'm not sure ATA could detect something like this. Actually, it's pretty hard to detect something like this. Even if you know that there is something on your network, it's very hard to identify the source. We were spending a lot of time using Wireshark, Network Monitor, and taking traces, trying to figure out what was going on. And I would think that having the workstation in more controlled environment, more maybe on separate segments of the network, in ability to segment your network and have a tighter control of your workstations in that specific case would probably help, and ability to monitor network traffic between the consumers and the domain controllers. And today there are tools out there that can do that. And there are also actually several startups in that area that are doing some very interesting things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Interesting.
endpoint detection, EDR, detection and response clients have gotten much more popular because of this. I think they still sort of suffer from the same pattern-based or signature-based issues that antivirus suffer from, but some of the more sophisticated ones now are able to do kind of like adaptive heuristics to detect unusual behavior on endpoints. It's not perfect, and attackers are always figuring out ways to work underneath the EDR solutions, but I think it's getting better for sure.
Yeah, or just getting for a moment back to the point of NotPetya, none of them actually catches it because it was not a malware, it was just behaving as administrator. Yeah.
Right, right, exactly.
Yeah. So another one, again, secure environment, and one day the domain controllers are just crawling. You try to query the domain controllers, and it takes them minutes to respond to very simple LDAP queries. We started with the basics, perfmon, trying to identify the bottlenecks, spent a lot of time there, and there was nothing that we could point our finger to. So at that point, we were suspecting non-page pool depletion that was still with 32-bit domain controllers. I used Pullmon because I wanted to see the usage of the non-paged and page pool of the kernel memory, and I probably got lucky because previous couple of weeks I was spending a lot in debugger, and I got familiar with pool tags with the name of the most common pool tags, and suddenly I saw something that kind of struck a nerve and it looked different. And at the end of the day, we were able to identify a rootkit that was running this kernel mode driver.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it was a very interesting one. It ended up that it was a red team exercise that went wrong, but it's the tools out there. The same can happen.
Yeah, I would be interesting to know how many people in the audience knows those tools you have mentioned, because it all is familiar to myself. I used them in the past, but I'm just interested how many people are actually using it right now or have a knowledge of those. Maybe we should throw later links to those to the audience as well. Because yeah, something like a Protsman is probably more familiar, but the tools which can help you with the pull tags and shared pool memories, so that's something less familiar probably.
Is that a sysinternals tool, Guy?
No, that was a separate download. I think it was part of Resource Kit. Maybe.
Oh, right.
So can you repeat the name for everybody? Pullman.
Pullman.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Pretty
okay.
interesting case. Yeah.
But again, it's 32-bit a area, and well, I hardly doubt someone will be trying to go look at the pull tags with the 64-bit architecture.
Yeah, it's not. I definitely don't see non-paged pool memory issues so much anymore. I can't remember the last time it's come up, but
Yeah,
it is interesting. I mean, I wonder if there are other tools to be able to find rootkits. I mean, I'm sure there are, but you probably have to get deep into debugging in kernel mode. Anyway, interesting. So lots of resources on the web, I think, for this. Tomasz, you've shared a few here.
Yeah, so I'm kind of following. There is a hashtag on the Twitter, AD horror story, and you should try to follow it and just read the threads there. It's really sometimes it's getting like you are getting this, oh my God, who will think about something like this? People are just sharing their observations from AD and different kind of stories.
Awesome.
It's really, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's scary. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, there's a Twitter handle, Director Ranger, who is posting a lot of useful tips and tools. So it's definitely worth following. There is a website, adsecurity.org, which is good because it is showing to all of you how to use those tools. So basically, you can hack your infrastructure using the common tools. Just to give you a bit of insight, how easy it is right now to hack the AD. I gave this URL to the intern at Radhika, or junior consultant, and he was able to pull the hack on AD in 30 minutes. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, because he took a manual and he followed it. Yeah.
What took him so long?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, so adsecurity.org is run by Sean Metcalf, who's actually speaking at the HIP conference this coming November, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, it's a great site.
Yeah, so I definitely encourage everybody who haven't done it to go to there is a section for Mimikatz and some other tools, and there is one article which basically shows how to hack your AD, and go to the workstation in your network. Just make sure that your admin knows that, and try it,
right.
or do the lab.
Yeah.
And of course, we are sharing a lot of blogs on our blog on Radhika, and I saw you're doing the same on Semperis. So it's always definitely worth to take a look at there.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I'm not sure if we're getting chats from people. I don't see them showing up in my window, but I'm curious if people think that these stories are common, or if you've come across them in the audience.
Yeah, that would be something interesting, because I can relate each of those stories over the last few years, or to multiple organizations. So I saw people having the similar problems. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it is more common than we think. It's just sometimes people are resolving it in a way that they are rebuilding a DC, or they are rebuilding something on the network, and they even don't get to the root cause of what happened. Yeah.
Right. And I came across a few of these just anecdotally from friends of mine in the industry, where actually in one case it was interesting. It was the first time I had ever heard of it, but given my background in group policy, somebody approached me about a customer who the attacker actually was able to compromise an account that had write permissions on the default domain policy, and they used that to write a scheduled task into GP preferences in the default domain policy, a scheduled task policy that distributed the malware via scheduled task in group policy to every machine on the network. And that was the first time I had heard of somebody using using group policy as a malware delivery system.
Yeah.
And it was pretty clever.
I haven't heard about that before, but yeah, I can imagine that. Actually, for the folks out there, probably the most common tool right now for doing something wrong on your network is a PowerShell. Yeah.
Yep.
And that was also the outcome of my security training last week, that people didn't know that, and they didn't know that there is a way of tracking what is being done in PowerShell on your servers. It's worth doing. Basically, the hackers got the message the PowerShell is easy to use. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, that's funny you bring that up, because I was just reading an article that I saw on Twitter over the weekend, where because most of the endpoint detection and response tools now are looking for PowerShell-based activity, this particular security researcher came up with a method for doing in-memory .NET execution that
Oh,
didn't trigger any of the
That's
that,
why,
PowerShell
that,
detection.
that one is
and
beautiful. You just
and
Yeah,
load in-memory
yeah,
assemblies and you can
exactly.
execute anything without any trace on the disk.
Yeah,
yeah, but
exactly.
that's exactly why Windows Defender right now is starting to track the in-memory execution. Yeah,
Right,
because
right.
that's the threat model right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Yeah, so NotPetya. I mean, I'm thinking, you know, most people should have patched for this by now, but I'm curious if this is still happening in organizations. And if you're not able to chat with us, then you know there is the question dialogue. I think in GoToMeeting, you should be able to post a question in there, which we're going to get to in a bit. I think maybe for the purposes of time, maybe get to our 5 tips right now so that we can, you know, make sure we have enough time to get questions at the end. And if you've
Yeah,
encountered cases
sure.
of DCs being infected with ransomware,
Yeah.
post it either in the chat or in the question dialogue, because we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, my interest point here is how many of organizations have thought about something. I mean, changing their infrastructure, procedures, processes as a result of all this chatter around NotPetya, yeah, and what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so let's get to our. Actually, this is kind of an interesting one I want to linger on for a little bit. So, how do you guys think the cloud changes or doesn't change the threat and the solutions around the threat?
So who's going first? I can do it.
Yeah, go for it.
Go.
Well, I think that and I always repeat it, cloud is not a solution. It's a set of technologies. But especially in this area, I think that even if not right now, I think it has a benefit right now. But going forward, it will give more and more value, because basically using the solutions like Defender ATP or ATA and other cloud-based technologies, we can harness the power of Microsoft or any other vendor who has more resources to basically analyze our network. And this is the main advantage, I think. I don't think that move to the cloud will solve something, but the cloud will give us the tools which basically will address the lack of manpower on our end to protect ourselves. Yeah, so that's kind of my point of view on it.
Yeah.
I would say that actually today the presence of the cloud actually increases the exposure, because, well, almost all of the customers are running in some sort of hybrid environment where your on-prem AD is synced with the cloud, Azure AD, for example. And if someone owns your on-prem AD, at that point he owns your Azure AD tenant, and vice versa. So.
Yep. Yeah, I think the other thing I'll just mention quickly is what I've seen, at least in the early days of hybrid deployments of on-prem AD and Azure AD, is that a lot of the practices that people have had in on-prem AD have not followed into the Azure AD space, probably mostly due to lack of education. But you might have good practices around domain admin in on-prem AD, but then you go up to global admins in Azure AD and you see 50 people in there, and a
That's
lot
a
of that,
valid point. Yeah.
a lot of that comes from the sort of the earlier days of Azure AD where there wasn't a lot of granularity of delegation. I think Microsoft's getting better with that with RBAC models and things like that, but it's definitely not followed. It's an opportunity for people to do poor behavior
Yeah,
in
that's a
Azure
valid
AD.
point.
All right, so let's get to our 5 steps. Step number 1, I think I'll start with this one, is just patch. patch. I mean, there really isn't, especially your domain controllers, even if you're a little bit hesitant on the rest of your organization, your domain controllers should be patched as quickly as possible. I think this is kind of a no-brainer, and I know people are, especially in large production environments, you sort of have to be careful that Microsoft hasn't pulled another bonehead move and done something that breaks your environment. So you do have to test, but I think especially when there's known vulnerabilities that are getting fixed, you sort of have to do that process as quickly as possible. And to be honest, this kind of argues in my mind for getting all of your DCs up to a modern version of the operating system. If you're still running 2008 R2 DCs, my only question is why. And I know that infrastructure often gets short shrift in terms of priorities, but you sort of have to think about it the way that we're thinking about it here, which is that AD is like #1 piece of infrastructure. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
I think that the problem is that people still think about those days in the past where you were waiting for a month before somebody said, okay, this patch is okay. Right now, the telemetry is actually much better. So if there is a problem, the vendor, in this case Microsoft, gets a message much quicker. And then usually within a couple of days, we know if there are problems or not.
Right.
But a lot of customers are still following this schedule that they are waiting for a month or something before patching DCs. And as a result, a lot of them are way behind with the updates.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Step 2.
Yeah, I can cover that one. And I think that's the one of very important steps, which relates to the story I shared with you. There's actually very little of need for people to be admins, and you have to remember that every admin is actually a vehicle for the movement in your network. So if you want to stop the movements in your network, you need to limit the number of people exposing those privileges. There is a good article on Microsoft how to implement it, but basically limit the number of administrators to only the minimum. And for those with the highest privileges, just basically make them work on a separate network segment, because this is what could, for example, stop NotPetya, if it could not access the admin accounts. And one thing which I saw very often to be omitted is basically local admins on the workstations. People are deploying the images, and all those images have the same admin account, which very often is not disabled. And this is exactly the technique which NotPetya used as well, to exploit those local admin accounts. So I think it's very important to follow this model.
Yeah, one point about the local admins is if you're not local admin or you don't have any kind of escalated privileges on a machine, you can't dump LM hashes from Mimikatz. It just doesn't work. You don't have the access to LSA memory. So I think this is a really important one. If an attacker gets onto a machine where there are local admins there, if heaven forbid you're making all of your regular users local admin on their workstations, you might as well just hand the keys over to the attacker. It doesn't make sense.
How often do you see organizations actually not making people local admins nowadays?
Well, I'd like to say that it's pretty common nowadays, but I still come across organizations where that's the case. I actually worked at one not too long ago, and it was a very large multinational software company. And they just, the argument was, oh, well, they're all developers and engineers. They need local admin. okay. Just, so let's make sure we keep moving. Guy,
Yeah.
why don't you cover this one?
Well, disaster recovery plan for AD. I've been doing this for almost what year? Yeah, for almost a decade. So,
So you know something about it.
I've had my share. I've had my share of actual disasters, and I've had my share of helping the customers to come back to life. And it boils down to backup and test your backups. Actually try to restore and try to simulate your recovery as close as possible to the actual real life scenario. Try to restore your domain controllers. Try to follow the forest recovery white paper steps and make sure that you have enough information, enough knowledge, enough tools to be able to complete your task. And if you realize that you're not able to do that, to get to the point where UAD is up and running and it is capable of serving your company infrastructure, then, well, you should probably engage with third parties. There are consultancy companies out there, and there are tools out there that can automate the forest recovery processes.
Yep.
Yeah, I would add to it that I hope it has improved, but in the past, on a question, do you have a forest recovery plan? Like
Oh, yeah.
95% of customers said why we should have one.
I think that was the first question on AD Wrap, on the questionnaire back in Microsoft, when I was delivering AD Wrap for customers. There was a questionnaire at the end of the delivery, and that was the question that most of the customers got wrong. No, we don't. Sorry. So yeah, but today it's getting better. The awareness is there, and well.
Cool. All right, number 4, limit privileges. So I think I'll just quickly cover this one, but just to kind of reiterate, there's really few tasks that need full domain admin or full domain administrators access. And you should really look into, if you haven't already, implementing some kind of privileged access management solution. So that is a combination of technologies like session management, where you're working through a jump box to get to all your systems, and password rotation, password vaulting, all of that stuff. If you implement it nowhere else, you should implement it on your domain controllers.
Yeah, I think that it's very important that what I'm seeing is that customers very often are delegating rights to a help desk, which are unnecessary. And the exercise our audience can do after this webinar is to check who has a right to reset the passwords in their network.
Right.
And this is being done very often only because they are lacking tools which are acting as a proxy. Because they are using like a standard console, and they are saying, okay, I need to be a domain admin to run it. And in my opinion, for every request that somebody wants a privilege in the network, there should be like this technique of 5 whys, yeah? Drill down why, as long as you're going to the very narrow down deep answer that, yeah, really you need it. So ask 5 times why and make them answer.
I like that. And finally, step number 5. Who wants to take this one? So I'll just quickly add my 2 cents, because I've spent a fair bit of time with Bloodhound. There's a lot of, so Bloodhound is a tool. It's an open source tool built by some guys at a company called SpecterOps. They're actually also speaking at HIP conference, not to plug that too much, but it's going to be a great show. And it's a tool for kind of identifying paths to privilege escalation, to getting to a domain admin. And it's amazing what you will find if you run this on your network, even if you think you're doing a pretty good job. And part of the protecting against that is really securing and monitoring changes to to sensitive AD objects. This is a kind of a key path of exploit that tools like Bloodhound point out. Let's see, I don't think I needed to say anything more. Does anyone else want any? I know we're just about running out of time, so
yeah, just to add to your point, it's basically there is a lot of broken permissions on the network, and reviewing those will improve your security in a greater way than buying another box to monitor your network. Yeah.
Exactly.
So actually, reviewing those permissions might have a great benefit on your network security, and it costs you nothing. Okay, it costs your time. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so that's our 5 steps, which is pretty simple. You know, the key here is be prepared. And I think we just kind of summarize, but have a procedure in place. I mean, Guy talked about having a tested recovery plan. If you test, then when the time comes and you've got your CIO breathing down your neck or CEO, you have a solid plan in place. I think that makes all the world of difference.
Yes, and educate yourself. That's a common, and your users.
Yeah, this is making me hungry, but I think the wrap up here is AD security is not black magic. A lot of these are processes that have and best practices that have been in place for a while, and it's just a matter of, again, educating, limiting rights, having backup, and stay safe.
Yes, and to add to this point, it's basically the people are the tools are out there. We know how to do it, but we are still seeing people missing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So applying the basics is very important. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to, Ali, I don't know if we have any questions that have come in. Maybe we can grab one or two. We're right on the hour, but hopefully people can stick around for a couple minutes and we can grab a couple questions. But just some links for people to get more information. I do want to kind of underscore the HIP conference. This is a vendor agnostic hybrid identity protection conference that we Semperis put together last year, kind of in the mold of the old Directory Experts Conference that that NetPro used to that created, and it's coming again this fall. We've got a bunch of great speakers, so I encourage everyone to check that out. Hopefully, we'll see you there.
Yeah, we have a bunch of white papers and blogs on our blog. So also, if you're interested in this topic, you will find some additional information there. We think it's pretty interesting to see, so just check them out.
Cool. And I guess we don't have any questions, or we can't see the questions. So if you do have questions, I hopefully apologize if we weren't able to see your chats or questions, but we'll feel free to reach out to us individually, either over Twitter, again, our various websites. Tomasz is going to be in Boston next week.
Yes,
Very cool.
So I just want to say that if you are by any chance in Boston next week on a conference, or you live there, just feel free to show up and just make sure that we meet.
That's great that you're speaking at Identiverse. This is the ping show, the ping identity show that it's a great identity show. That's cool that you're speaking. What are you speaking on?
I will be speaking about actually securing applications with a web application proxy in some for non-standard scenarios people are not thinking about. We did a couple of deployments of applications like SAP for mobile scenarios where you can apply conditional access, and yeah, I will cover this.
That's awesome. Great. All right. I think that's it. Thanks everyone for attending. And thank you guys, Guy and Tomasz, for participating. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you.
Darren.
All right.
Yeah,
Take care.
bye.
Bye.